We have several different ways that we can go about creating text and titles within DaVinci Resolve, and by default we're taken to the cut page when we first launch the application. So let's begin by taking a look at how we can do so here. Now I'm going to come up to the media pool. I've already imported some video clips, so I'll click, hold, and drag down to the timeline and then release that, and let's just scroll forward or scrub forward a bit. And I think we'll roll with this frame here. Now, in order to add our text on the cut page, we can come to the top left, and then we can see we have titles. So let's click once on that. And then we have our titles up at the top, Fusion titles. And then if we scroll down to the bottom, we can see that we have subtitles down below. But let's make our way back up to the top. And I'm just going to select this simple text generator. And when we hover on these, we can see a little preview in our overview window in the right-hand side. So what I'm going to do is click, hold, and drag down to our timeline and just place that at the playhead and release. And we can see that a second video track has now been created, video 2. Here in the track header section, we have our text clip that's been created, and we can see actually basic title. This is kind of the default wording that's in the text generator when we drag it into our timeline. But we can come to the top right corner and click on inspector, and then we can see that that text is listed here. And we can just click and hold to highlight that and then enter in a new title or text, something very creative. I'll click outside of that field. And now we can see our new title in the center of our frame. Now also within our inspector to the right hand side, we have a ton of different parameters that we can go about adjusting and getting the text set up exactly as we like, but we'll come back to these in just a couple of minutes. Let's move on and take a quick look at the other couple of methods of adding text. Now, if we're working in the edit page, we can add our text and titles in a similar way. So let's go ahead and grab another clip here and bring that into our timeline. Let's come to our playhead and then just scrub this forward just a little bit to find a good place here. We'll just choose that. Now in the top left, we can come to our effects, click once on that. Then down at the bottom, our toolbox is expanded out, so if you don't see everything listed below, just click on the toolbox here. And we have our title, so we'll click once on that. And as we saw in the cut page, we have the same three groups, our titles, our Fusion titles, and at the bottom we have our subtitles. But we'll again come up to the top. And just know that the Fusion titles are a bit fancier than the regular ones at the top here. They typically will have animation that's included, and we'll again take a look at that in just a moment. But for now, I'm just going to click on the basic text generator, click, hold, and drag that to wherever I would like in the timeline. I'm going to place that somewhere where the playhead is here, so we can see again we have the basic title. It's hard to make out here in this window, but it is there. We can again come to the inspector in the top right corner, click once, and then we can see basic title for our rich text. So let's go ahead and put something different in here. And so we can see that that's been updated in our viewer. If we like, we can come to the size. Let's just make this a little bit bigger so we can see that that is actually showing up within our viewer. And let's actually scroll down just a little bit. And we have a drop shadow that's available as one of the options. So we can come to the offset, the x-axis, which is going to send that out horizontally. Our y is going to adjust vertically. And then let's take the opacity up a bit. So you have this as a tool, or one of the many tools and options within the inspector for working with your text. Let's actually take the blur down a little bit. And again, we're going to take a closer look at some of these different parameters available within the inspector for manipulating our text. But for now, let's quickly take a look at one last method for adding text, and that's within the Fusion page. Once we've positioned our playhead in the edit window over the clip and frame that we'd like to add text to within the Fusion page, we can then click on Fusion down at the very bottom. And the Fusion page has a node-based workflow, so adding text here is going to be a bit different than what we've seen in the previous pages. At the bottom of our interface, we have the node editor, and within this panel, we can see two nodes which are here by default. The first one, Media in 1, represents the video clip we've selected on the edit page and its incoming signal to the Fusion page. This is then connected by a yellow line with a yellow arrow to our Media out 1, which sends our process signal with included effects back out to our viewer up above. And we know that our finished processing is going to be displayed on the second viewer because we can see in the bottom left-hand corner we have these couple of dots. One is black, one is white. The white indicates that we're displaying our Media out 1 on the second viewer. If I click once to select this and press 1 on the QWERTY keyboard, then it's going to display on viewer 1 as well. You can see there's two white dots there. Now I'll press 1 to toggle that off and press 2, and then that's going to toggle off the display in viewer 2 as well. So if we hover, we can also click on the dots to display our Media out 1 as well. But we'd like to add some text, and this looks completely different than what we've seen before. So at the top of our node editor here, we have a toolbar, and this contains some of the most commonly used nodes, including text. And we can see that here. If I just hover, we can see Text Plus pops up. So when we're working in Fusion, we're going to be working with Text Plus by default if we're accessing it from the toolbar. So what I'm going to do is just click, hold, and drag this text node, and you can see if I hover on the yellow line from our Media in 1 going to our Media out 1, you can see that turns blue and yellow, and that lets you know it's going to be placed in our signal path and added. If I place it above while the line is yellow, then it's just going to be added a single node. It's not connected to anything. So while this is highlighted in red, I'll press backspace to remove that out. Let's click, hold, and drag it to our line. We can see it turns blue and yellow. I'll release. And then now to the left, we have our text node, and that has been added to our signal from Media in 1 to Media out 1 with a merge node. Now, going into depth about these different concepts is a bit much for this tutorial, but I just wanted to quickly show. If you want your text, just drag it onto that signal path, and your text node will be created and added with the merge node. And of course, as we've seen, we can use the inspector to add our text, but we need to be sure that our text node is selected. It doesn't have our red border, so let's click once to be sure it is, and we can see our text field is completely empty. So let's go ahead and get something in here. And just like that, we've got some text inputted to our project. And since we're actually working with Text Plus, we have a ton of different options for the layout, transform, shading, image, settings. So a ton of flexibility and animation possibilities, and I highly recommend spending some time just experimenting with the different options that you have. If anything gets out of hand, you can always just come to the very top of our text one, click on this button here, and it will reset everything back to the very initial state, including removing our text out. If we'd like to remove our nodes, we can just be sure that it's highlighted with the red frame. I'll press backspace to remove that out. We'll remove our merge node as well. Backspace, and we're done. So let's finish up by briefly taking a look at some of the different parameters that are available for modifying the text once we've added it, and we'll do that within the edit page. The parameters and options that we take a look at here will be exactly the same for our cut and fusion pages, because whatever page that we're working on, we'll be making use of adjustments within the inspector. So let's come to our media pool, and we'll drag in a video clip to create a timeline, and let's go ahead and select an area of this that we would like to work with. We'll just say here, And as we've seen before, we'll come up to the effects button in the top left. Let's click once on that. And actually, I'd like to have a little bit more real estate down at the bottom. So I'm going to click on this collapse button here to make our view a bit smaller vertically here. And we'll come back to the effects tab. And now we're strictly focusing on this category. In the left panel, we'll come down to titles, click once to be sure that that's selected. And as we've already seen, we have titles, Fusion titles, which are typically going to have more animation involved and be a bit more fancy. At the very bottom, we have subtitles if we'd like to work with those. And also, as we've seen, we can hover and see an example of what exactly we're going to be getting. If there's animation involved, we can hover from left to right. Okay, but these are the basic titles. Now if we come to the Fusion, and then we can hover left to right, and typically we'll see some sort of animation happening. And if you are not seeing the animation, the preview, you can come up to the kind of ellipsis looking button here. This is our options menu. Clicking once, just be sure that hover scrub preview is activated. And alternatively, if that drives you crazy, you can turn it off there. Let's make our way back up to the top, and we've already briefly discussed the text and text plus here. Now, the text plus option is a more complex 2D text generator from Fusion, and it is more feature rich as far as styling and animation controls. But if you just like to quickly add text to your project and don't need anything too fancy, the basic text generator is just fine. It also has a couple of advantages, like being able to input and edit text directly within our viewer window, as well as being able to use different fonts and font sizes within a single text clip. Now, what does all of that mean? Let's go ahead and start by bringing in the basic text generator. Click, hold, and dragging to our timeline. I'll release that. We can see in our viewer, our timeline viewer, we now have the basic title, which we've seen previously. Now, one of the things that I was mentioning is being able to input and edit text directly within our viewer. So if I were to, we need to be sure that our playhead is over our text generator. And once I click once, we can immediately see that I can actually transform this by making it larger. I can spin it around a bit. But also, since we're using the basic text generator, I can double click and actually input text directly within our viewer. So that's really cool there. Let's actually click, hold, and highlight that. I'll backspace and then I can remove that out. Now it is a little bit hard to see where your cursor is, or not so much the cursor, but rather the flashing cursor when you're entering text. So let's actually come to the top right and open up the inspector. So now you'll see that when I click in the viewer, take note of our text field here within the inspector. So I'm gonna double click or click once, and we can now see that flashing cursor. And I can see actually where I'm putting things in at. More basic title. Okay, so we can edit in here, or we can add directly within our viewer. But let's change this to something a bit more interesting. And we'll move on to some of the parameters below here. So the font family, we can choose that. By clicking on the down arrow, we open this menu here. And as I hover and move vertically, notice in our viewer, we have a dynamic preview of any of the fonts, the families that we're selecting, which is incredibly convenient and a time saver. Not all apps will do this. We can then choose the font face. We can choose a different color. We'll just select this, okay. But let's actually Control Z to take that back. We then have our size, so we can use the slider here to increase. Now this moves a bit quickly, so if you would like to adjust this in a more precise way, I would recommend hovering on the input field here and then dragging left or right. Then you have more precise control. You can always double click and manually enter a value in there as well. If you'd like to take this parameter back or any of these other parameters back to their default setting, you have these little round arrows, and we can click that once and then take it back to its default state. Now, if I change the size again, the default went to 128. Let's pull that down to 42. I can also reset this to the default by clicking on any of the names. So we're working with size. Let's double click on size. Notice in our viewer, and the 42 here is taken back to our default setting. And this is going to apply to any adjustments that we're making, double clicking the title or clicking on the round arrow circle thing will take it back to its initial state. Now, if you've made adjustments to many different parameters and you absolutely hate what has been done and you want to change them all back, in the top right hand corner we have this. We can click to take all parameters back at one go. Okay, so we've got tracking. It's going to adjust the spacing horizontally for our text. We've got our line spacing. So if I were to press enter and let's put a bit more text. Now the spacing is going to be between our two lines of text. We'll take that back to the default, and then we can scroll down a bit, choose our font style, the case, our alignment. Okay. So these are all very familiar. If you've used any word processor, these controls are going to be pretty familiar. But we'll look at position, because we can also change the X or our horizontal position of our text, our Y position or our vertical. We can change the zoom. I'm just click, hold, and dragging left and right. Our rotation angle. But again, let's come up and reset all of these to their default. Now we also have stroke here, our drop shadow. So basically we would come to the offset and just increase and increase or lower vertically. Let's make our text a bit bigger. And let's change the opacity. So hopefully you can see that this is actually working. I'll move that up really high so you can see that. Okay, and we can take the blur down or increase it. If we'd like to add a background, we have that option available as well. This is actually on by default, but we're not seeing it because the height is all the way down. So if we come to height and click, hold, and drag that to the right, we can increase the height. We can adjust the width of that background, and we can adjust the opacity. Okay, let's make our way back up to the top and reset everything. We'll do that. Okay, now another cool thing to be aware of is that we can make some of these adjustments within the viewer itself. So in the bottom left-hand corner, I can click once on this icon and then activate the transform. So if we click on the down arrow, we can see we're on transform. And then directly within the viewer, I can grab this corner and change the size. Using my mouse wheel, I can zoom in and out of this viewer. Coming back to the down arrow, we can change this to crop, dynamic zoom. So our green box is going to be where we're starting out, and the red is going to be where we end up at for the length of this clip. By default, when we drag these in, they're going to be 5 seconds. So if we'd like to start zoomed out very far, we'll pull that in, and then as this plays back, we will zoom in on the title. So let's come back to the beginning here. We'll zoom in with the mouse wheel and play this back. Okay, and so you can see how that functions there. We also have Open Effects Overlay, Fusion Overlay, and Annotations. And maybe we'll take a in-depth look at those in a future video. And we can then turn off modifications from being made in this viewer by clicking on the icon here in the left corner. Okay, so there's a lot more that we can cover with the text, but in the name of just keeping this as an overview, we will do that at a later time. And the very final thing I want to finish up with is how can we go about extending the length or duration of our title and titles. And we can do that by coming to our clip within the timeline, hovering at the edge where we have the single bracket, and I can make this for as long as I would like for it to be. You can see we have a pop-up window, the black window, that shows up as we click, hold, and drag, and gives us an update of the changes that we're making. We can shorten the duration by coming to the right, and we can do that at either end. If we'd like to introduce a fade in for our text, we can come to the top left corner and pull this handle in. Coming to the top right corner, we have a similar handle where we can pull that to the left and introduce a fade out. So then when we play this back, we can see our text fade in and out. And the final thing, we actually didn't look at adding any titles. So let's we've worked with text. Let's take a look at maybe a Fusion title. As we saw, we can hover and see if there's any animations here. So let's just grab this one here, click, hold, and drag to our timeline. Let's position our cursor here. Now, you could see that when I hovered, we had two kind of text fields here, the one on the top and the one at the bottom. And in our inspector, once I select this, we can see the first field, we can adjust that there. Scrolling down, this is our second field. Let's move our cursor forward just a little bit here. And for this, I'm going to change to, and for our top field, all right, let's play this back. And there we go. That is a quick look at one of our Fusion titles that's available. Again, different parameters that you can make use of. We've got settings, controls, another setting at the top, clicking once to access that. We've got transform, cropping, composite, and so on. Okay, so this has been an overview of working with text in DaVinci Resolve. I hope you found it useful. I will see you in the next tutorial.